Most children's television didn't begin as education. It began as noise, bright colors, loud voices, something to keep kids busy for half an hour while their parents made dinner or folded laundry. The shows were cheap, the production values were low, and nobody seemed to think that was a problem. But in the late 1960s, a small group of people asked a different question. What if television could actually teach children, especially the ones who needed it the most? This is the story of how Sesame Street was created. Not just another children's show, but a deliberate experiment in using the most addictive medium in American homes to level the playing field for kids who were already falling behind. It's a story about a dinner party conversation that became a revolution. By 1969, television was everywhere. Nearly every American household owned a set, and preschool children were watching an average of 27 hours per week. Think about that. Almost 4 hours a day, every day, sitting in front of a glowing screen. I bet in 2025 we could not imagine that. But what were they learning? How to want things? Which cereal to beg for? Which toys to demand at Christmas? Children could recite jingles for Budweiser before they could recite the alphabet. The programs themselves, producer Joan Ganz Cooney called children's television a wasteland, and she wasn't alone. Shows were produced cheaply by local stations with little thought for education, diversity, or whether the content was actually good for children. Many were condescending, most were derivative, some were outright violent. Meanwhile, researchers were becoming alarmed by a different kind of violence, the quiet, structural kind that happened before children even reached kindergarten. Kids from low income families were entering school already behind their middle class peers, substantially behind. And those gaps weren't closing as they moved through the education system, they were widening. Early childhood education could help. That much was clear. But programs like Head Start could only reach so many children. There weren't enough classrooms. There wasn't enough funding. There weren't enough teachers. Television, though, television was already in every home, already babysitting millions of children every single day, for better or worse. The question wasn't whether television was teaching children, it was. The question was, could it teach them something worth knowing? The idea that would become Sesame Street began, as many revolutions do, with a conversation that nobody thought would matter. In early 1966, Joan Ganz Cooney and her husband hosted a dinner party at their Manhattan apartment. The guest list included Lloyd Morissette, a psychologist and vice president at the Carnegie Corporation, and his wife, Mary. At some point during the evening, Morissette mentioned something his young daughter had done. She'd woken up early one morning, turning on the television, and sat transfixed, not by a program, but by the test pattern, the static image that stations broadcast before programming began. She just sat there, staring, completely absorbed. Morissette, who spent his days thinking about early childhood development, found this fascinating and a little disturbing. If television could hold a child's attention that completely, even when there was nothing to watch, what could it do if someone actually tried to use that power for something meaningful? The conversation stayed with Cooney. She was already thinking about these questions. She'd recently produced a documentary about a Harlem preschool program that would become part of Head Start. The experience had changed her. As she later put it, she'd become absolutely involved intellectually and spiritually with the civil rights movement and with the educational deficit that poverty created. A few days after the dinner party, Cooney, Morissette, and her boss met at the Carnegie Corporation offices. They wanted to explore whether television, the medium everyone blamed for rotting children's brains, could actually be used to help them learn. But they didn't know how. Not yet. Morissette hired Cooney to find out. He gave her funding to spend months traveling across the United States and Canada, interviewing educators, psychologists, and television producers. Her report, published in 1968, was titled The Potential Uses of Television in Preschool Education. That will be linked below. It was, in essence, a blueprint for something that had never been tried before. Cooney proposed using the techniques that made television advertising so devastatingly effective: short segments, high production values, repetition, catchy music, but redirecting all that power toward preparing children for school, specifically children from disadvantaged backgrounds, children who were already being left behind. This was the era of Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society, a series of ambitious federal programs aimed at eliminating poverty and racial injustice. The show would be part of that vision, a way to reach millions of children who would never set foot in a Head Start classroom. But here's what made the proposal revolutionary. Cooney wasn't interested in creating educational content that only reached the children who needed it. She knew that wouldn't work. Poor families didn't control what aired on television. The show had to be good enough that everyone wanted to watch it. It had to appeal to middle-class families and inner-city families alike. It had to be so entertaining that kids would choose it over cartoons. Only then could it do what it was designed to do. The Carnegie Corporation gave Cooney a $1 million grant to establish the Children's Television Workshop in 1968. More sets secured additional funding from the Ford Foundation and the U.S. federal government. The total budget? $8 million. It was an enormous sum for a television show that didn't exist yet. But this wasn't going to be a normal television show. Cooney assembled a team that had never been brought together before: television producers, child psychologists, education specialists, researchers, advertisers. They didn't just want to make a show with lessons. They wanted to engineer how children learn from every single second of screen time. One of the most influential voices in early meetings was Chester Pierce, an African American psychiatrist and Harvard professor. Pierce helped design what he called the show's hidden curriculum. The explicit curriculum would teach letters and numbers. The hidden curriculum would teach something harder to measure, but equally important: that Black children mattered, that they were smart, that they belonged in the story. Pierce insisted the show present an integrated, harmonious community, not as a special episode about tolerance, but as the everyday reality. This would be a neighborhood where people of different races lived together, talked together, learned together, not as a lesson in itself, but as the backdrop for everything else. This was radical in 1968. This was the year Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, the year cities burned, the year white families were fleeing to the suburbs to get away from the integration Pierce was proposing to put on television. But the team agreed. If the show was going to reach inner city Black children, it had to look like their world. It had to feel like their world. It had to tell them that their world was worth paying attention to. Producer John Stone was obsessed with getting the set right. He'd worked on Captain Kangaroo, a show filmed on a soundstage that looked like nowhere in particular. But Stone believed that wouldn't work for this project. If inner city children were going to relate to Sesame Street, he argued, it needed to be set somewhere they recognized. Stone cited a 1968 public service announcement that had been running in New York. The campaign showed images of Harlem, brownstones, stoops, children playing on sidewalks, and asked New Yorkers to give a damn about kids living in poverty. That was it. That was the aesthetic. Stone sent set designer Charles Rosen to scout locations in Harlem, the Upper West Side, and the Bronx. They studied the architecture, the street life, the textures. The brownstones with their front steps where people gathered, the trash cans, the fire escapes, the bodega on the corner. They built a fictional street that felt like a real place. Years later, when actress Sonia Manzano, a Puerto Rican woman from the Bronx, saw this show for the first time as a college student, her immediate reaction was, "Hey, that's my street." That reaction was the whole point. Stone also made another crucial decision. The cast would be majority Black. White actors would be in the minority. This was unprecedented for American television in 1969. Most African American cast and crew came up through the interconnected black entertainment world of late 1960s New York. Loretta Long, who would play Susan from the pilot episode through today, had been co-host of Soul, an unapologetic black power showcase on New York public television. She was a teacher by training. When set designer Charles Rosen, who also worked on Soul, told her about the new show, he said, "This is going to be about teaching preschoolers. You need to know about it." Long auditioned by singing "I'm a Little Teapot." The children watching the audition footage stood up and sang along with her. She got the part. The musical talent for the pilot came through a connection to Harlem's Apollo Theater. A 16-member youth ensemble called Listen My Brother performed in that first episode. 3 of the vocalists would go on to significant music careers. Luther Vandross, who would win 8 Grammys, Robin Clark, who would sing with David Bowie, Fonzie Thornton, who would help form the band Chic. On guitar was Carlos Alomar, a Puerto Rican native of Harlem, who would later co-write Fame with David Bowie and John Lennon. In that first episode, the musicians wore African dashikis, the black power fashion of the moment. The show enlisted prominent African American guest stars early on. James Earl Jones, fresh off his Tony Award-winning performance in The Great White Hope, recited the alphabet with slow, commanding authority. Gospel singer Mahalia Jackson led the children in singing "He's Got the Whole World in His Hand." And in 1972, Nina Simone sat on the stoop with 4 black children and sang "To Be Young, Gifted, and Black." The message was unmistakable. This show was rooted in black culture. This was a neighborhood where black children were centered, celebrated, and taken seriously. Jim Henson didn't want to do a children's show. Not another one. He'd already created the Muppets and was building a career in more experimental, adult-oriented work. When John Stone approached him in 1968, Henson was reluctant. But Stone wouldn't take no for an answer. He'd seen what Henson's puppets could do, and he believed they were essential to making the show work. Henson agreed, and his Muppets became the secret weapon. They weren't just entertainment. Each character was designed with specific educational goals. Oscar the Grouch taught children about negative emotions, that it was okay to be grumpy sometimes. Cookie Monster demonstrated impulse control or the struggle with it. Bert and Ernie modeled friendship and problem solving between 2 very different personalities. But there was a problem. In July 1969, the producers created 5 test episodes to show to preschoolers in Philadelphia and New York. The results were concerning. Children paid close attention during the Muppets segment, but their interest dropped significantly during the street scenes with only human actors. The reason? Child psychologists had advised the producers to keep the Muppets and humans separate. Mixing fantasy and reality, they warned, would confuse young children. The producers had listened, and the show was failing because of it. Stone, along with producer David Connell, thought the psychologists were wrong. They'd worked together on Captain Kangaroo and knew from experience that kids could handle fantasy and reality side by side. Cooney agreed, so they made a decision that would define everything that came after. They ignored the experts. They reshot the street scenes. Henson and his team redesigned the Muppets so they could walk and interact with the human cast. Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch were created specifically for this purpose. Full-body Muppets who could exist on the street as neighbors, not just visitors from some other world. According to researcher Gerald Lesser, this was a turning point in the history of Sesame Street. Author Malcolm Gladwell later called it the essence of Sesame Street, the artful blend of fluffy monsters and earnest adults. It's the thing you picture when you think of the show. Big Bird talking to a child on the stoop. Oscar arguing with Gordon from inside his trash can. Ernie and Bert doing a bit in their apartment, then cutting to Maria in the fix-it shop. Fantasy and reality woven together so seamlessly that children never questioned it. Sesame Street premiered on a Monday morning. It reached about 2/3 of the country. Not everyone had access to public television yet, but the response was immediate. Parents loved it, critics praised it, and most importantly, children watched it. 7 million children every single day during the first season. By November 1970, just 1 year after the premiere, Big Bird appeared on the cover of Time magazine. The accompanying article declared Sesame Street not only the best children's show in TV history, but one of the best parents' shows as well. President Nixon sent a congratulatory letter. Dr. Benjamin Spock predicted the show would create better trained citizens, fewer unemployables, and smaller jail populations. Studies by the Educational Testing Service confirmed what parents were already seeing. Children who watched Sesame Street were learning. They scored higher on literacy and numeracy tests than children who didn't watch. The effect was strongest for children from low-income families, exactly the audience the show had been designed to reach. But not everyone celebrated. In May 1970, the Mississippi State Commission voted not to air Sesame Street on the state's newly launched public television network. The reason, according to a commission member who leaked the vote to the New York Times, Mississippi was not yet ready for the show's racially integrated cast. Think about what that means. A show designed to teach preschoolers their ABCs was considered too dangerous to broadcast because black and white people were shown living together as neighbors. Cooney called the ban a tragedy for both the white and black children of Mississippi. The decision was reversed 3 weeks later after national outcry, and a commercial station picked up the show instead. When the cast visited Jackson, Mississippi, local police showed up in riot gear. Loretta Long later recalled the visit. Little white kids would reach out to kiss me or Gordon, and you could see their mothers were uneasy. But they'd loosen up. Because how can you hate someone who makes your child so happy? The show also faced criticism from communities it was trying to serve. Hispanic advocacy groups pointed out the almost complete absence of Latino characters in the first 2 seasons. They called the show racist and said its bilingual segments were poor quality and patronizing. The producers listened. By the show's 3rd season, they had hired Hispanic actors, production staff, and researchers. Luis and Maria joined the cast and became beloved characters for decades. Women's organizations criticized the gender dynamics. Susan was originally a housewife, and there were almost no female Muppets. The producers responded by making Susan a nurse and eventually hiring more female writers and performers. And then there was Roosevelt Franklin. Quite a name. Roosevelt was a Muppet character created by Matt Robinson, the actor who played Gordon. Roosevelt was openly, deliberately black. He spoke in what the producers called Black English and used the call and response style of a black preacher when teaching. Some viewers loved him. Others, including many African American executives at the Children's Television Workshop, felt Roosevelt reinforced negative stereotypes of black children as loud, undisciplined, and linguistically deficient. The character was eventually cut from the show. These weren't easy conversations, but they demonstrated something important. The people behind Sesame Street were willing to listen, adapt, and sometimes admit they'd gotten it wrong. By the show's 10th anniversary in 1979, 9 million American children under 6 were watching Sesame Street daily. 4 out of 5 children had watched it over a 6-week period. 90% of children from low-income inner-city homes regularly viewed the show. More than 1,000 research papers have been published on the educational impact of Sesame Street. That won't be linked below, but you can find them. The consensus is clear. It worked. A 2015 study found that children who had access to the show performed measurably better in school compared to those who didn't. The effects were strongest for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. The cost per child? About $5 per year, compared to the $7,600 per child per year that Head Start cost taxpayers. But the impact went beyond test scores. Sesame Street changed what people expected from children's television. It proved that educational content didn't have to be boring, that entertainment and learning weren't opposites. that television could respect children's intelligence instead of insulting it. It also did something even more fundamental. It told millions of children that they mattered, that learning was for them, that their neighborhoods, their families, their lives were worth paying attention to. For Black children in 1969, that message was revolutionary. In 1970, musician Gil Scott-Heron recorded "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised" in Harlem. It was a blistering critique of how television numbed Americans to the real struggles happening around them. He sang sardonically, "The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox. The revolution will not go better with Coke. The revolution will not be televised." But Scott Heron was wrong, or at least his timing was off. The revolution had already been broadcast. It premiered November 10th, 1969 on public television. It was brought to you by the letters W, S, and E, and the numbers 2 and 3. And it looked like a street in Harlem where a giant yellow bird could ask questions, where a grouchy monster could live in a trash can, and where children of every background could learn that they were smart enough, worthy enough, and important enough to be taught. Sesame Street wasn't perfect. It made mistakes. It faced criticism. It adapted and grew, sometimes got things wrong before getting them right. But it proved something that seemed impossible in 1969, that television could do more than sell cereal and babysit children, that the most addictive medium in American homes could be used to level the playing field instead of widening the gaps. That childhood entertainment could carry responsibility without losing joy, and that a show designed for the 4-year-old inner city Black youngster could end up teaching the entire world how to get to Sesame Street. Next time, we'll take a closer look at how specific characters, segments, and even merchandise carry those lessons beyond the screen and into everyday life. Check my shorts for those as well. This is Scruffy Unicorn, and this is where worn-in memories begin.